Hello and welcome to Testing World. This week we're going to look at the Rolls-Royce of automation solutions. So check out this.
So what do we mean by Rolls-Royce solution? Well, we're talking about the high-end solution. Last week I covered the Mini, which had the agility to be very capable, very well handled, still gets you from A to B. But part of it is, if we go in for the high-end solutions, what could potentially we use? In this particular week, I'm going to highlight maybe using something like a performance tool to actually do large-scale or high-volume automated testing. And when you think large-scale, you've got to think about LoadRunner. LoadRunner's been around since the 90s and has been the de facto standard for load generation. I'm going to use LoadRunner Community, which gives you 50 licenses for free, thanks to Todd DiCaprio when he was at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise for helping introduce that. So you can go and test this out. You can test out the true client technology, which I'm going to demonstrate to you right now. So how does true client work? Well, it can run either in a browser, or Chromium. It's going to capture it. But this isn't new. Back in the days, when it was Astra Load Test, as mentioned by Scott Moore the other week, you could use UI Load, which eventually turned into Astra Quick Test, which we now know as UFT, which I've written a book behind me about, a cookbook of patterns. But as you can see, we're using LoadRunner to capture the UI using the true client, and we are putting in the first name, surname, email. Of course, this needs to be data driven. That's one of the challenges when it comes to correlation. When you're using any type of load tool, you might have things like a unique ID or a bearer token, which you need to be able to parameterize or dynamically pull from another request or response header. In this case, because we're using the UI, we don't need to worry about any of that stuff. So straight away, you can see we're able to play that back in the Chromium browser, and we're going to probably get a new record. But this is a performance engineering tool. It's not really an automation tool. So whether or not we let it on to our Mercury challenge will be a question at the end. But of course, you're going to have to parameterize this. So I'm going to show you some tips around how easy it is. Of course, if you're familiar with this product, things like just a static file or a database is quite easy to get from. But I'm also going to show you the virtual table server. So as you can see, I'm just going to show you some parameters, how quick and easy it is. This kind of capability has been around for a long time. And of course, it's a lot cleaner when you look at automation tools, because typically it's reading from some kind of XLX format, whereas this time I pulled it straight in from a CSV file or a flat file. Also, what you'll see is I have to replace the parameters. So I need to be able to tell it that it's going to use different parameters for that first name and surname, which is very easy. Of course, if you're using C or you're using JavaScript, you could embed that as well. In this particular case, I'm just going to use the client for ease. But we got a very fast time there. And, like I said, why it's so important to think about this is things like PAL, so Performance Application Lifecycle, which unfortunately looks like it's gone end of life since Micro Focus took over LoadRunner, because it's no longer as part of the additional downloads, which is usually on the second CD, if you remember the DVD version of it. And within Performance Application Lifecycle, one of the cool things which you could do is you could connect to, say, for instance, logs within your app server, so JBoss or whatever it may be, and you'll be able to start building more realistic volumetrics based on actual usage on the right-hand side. So I talk a lot about shift right. So being able to go into and get those additional components and bring in the performance application lifecycle gave you a starter for 10 of what the usage patterns are. But more importantly, what you could do is you could pull out of those logs if you're using something a bit more like Flex Data Services, which everything's is an XML payload. You could actually pull out the data that you actually want. So this is where shift right gets really interesting, and all that APM data on the right hand side, how you can potentially take that, obfuscate it, and provide all the data, say for a full year's worth of data, and try all the different permutations. So high volume automated testing. Then you've got virtual table server, which you could connect to and you could inject more data whilst it's running. So if you found that you needed more new accounts or some accounts were locking, instead of stopping your scenario of your soak test of 8 hours. So I'm going to try and run about 1,000 browser proxies, testing whether or not a script is actually running and becoming DOM-enabled. So let's kick this off. So one of the tricks, obviously, as you can probably tell, I am running out of hours. So this is a test server that I'm bringing up. I've also got systems in different parts of the world. A VPN to emulate the location which I want to come out. I'm also monitoring, in this particular case, I'm using New Relic to kind of get an idea of what's happening on the server side to see what that injection of UI scripts is going to look like. And then I'm using network virtualization, so using NV to allow me to create that kind of more realistic profile of what the end user's getting. But these users aren't just request response pairs. These users are full UI, DOM rendered, DOM complete instances. So all the JavaScripts, all the extra APIs that are being called, all that additional kind of overhead is more realistic than just the standard request and responses which you get from not running it in a browser proxy. So as you can probably expect, as you can see all the instances of Chromium running in the background, each one of these has got about 100 meg footprint on each one of the instances. So you can see, if I open that up, that there's actually a number of tabs that are open for each one of those instances. So you can probably see under load, I've got 69% memory utilization, 32% of my GPU, which is a dedicated 2080 RTX to this kind of task. I'm running an Alienware Area 51. You can tell I'm running 32 gig with 12 cores. So you need to be able to have a lot of available kit to be able to do this kind of headless browser proxy execution of automation or high volume automation testing. So LoadRunner 2021 True Client comes in at high volume automated testing at a 129.6. Unfortunately, it isn't an automation tool, so we're not going to be able to keep it on the list, but it's definitely a contender if you're thinking about pure raw speed and scale. I'd like to dedicate this episode to Niall, who did some amazing work on time to quality. Niall, you'll be truly missed as a QI Jedi.